All right, thank you for this kind introduction. This talk is about managing complexity, and it's usually interesting if you are dealing with enterprise software, B2B applications, ERP, HR, or complex CAD applications. So I hope you will get some value in it, how you can use it to make it approachable for your users. Just a short notice about myself. I work as a product designer at Brighter. We are basically building no-code applications for corporates and for lawyers, so they can build own apps. And because building own apps, it's a pretty complex task, we try to make it as approachable as possible for them. Before that, I worked at Maxon, the makers of Cinema 4D, so I was dealing with designing complex 3D software and make it also available for artists. The first thing when you talk about complexity is maybe how do we define it? So when we look at this market in Mumbai, it seems like a very, very complex situation, like a very complex scenario. But the answer is really, is it complex? Well, it depends. So if you are a guy like me, so you're a tourist and you're basically there for the first time, then it feels like really, really overwhelming. So you really don't know how to get from A to B, and it's pretty noisy, it's loud. But let's say if you're a local guy and you are there, let's say, for ages, then you somehow find it easy to get along there. You really know where everything is, you feel it somehow. And the thing is that complexity is also, it's kind of a subjective thing. You somehow can get used to it. Here's another example from a cockpit from an Airbus A320. And I mean, for the pilot, this whole UX, this whole UI thing is pretty logical. It's not bad UX. I mean, for me, it's really, really overwhelming. All these levers, displays, and buttons, they are really, really too much for me. But honestly, flying an airplane is a complex thing. You cannot simplify this. You have to deal with all safety procedures, weather conditions. I mean, for this, you can fly Microsoft Flight Simulator, but not an Airbus. So to summarize it maybe in a short thing, complexity is something which is somehow unavoidable. It's there by nature. You cannot really simplify it. But the good thing is, you can manage it somehow. You can make it approachable. There is another term which is also called complicated. And most people are talking about things or products that can get complicated. And on the one hand, we have the complex thing and we have the complications. So what's basically the difference in that? And we can look at a simple procedure of making tea. So if you want to make a tea, you need hot water. So you need to boil it hot water. Then you put a nice tea bag in your cup. Then you put the water in. You wait maybe 5 minutes, and then you can enjoy your tea. So pretty simple procedure. Well, unless you have one of these modern smart home boilers, which you need first connect to your Wi-Fi, then you turn it on, then you need to look at this nice splash screen at the display, then you need to adjust the temperature, download the app on your iPhone, connect the app to your water boiler, put water in it, then you need to measure the temperature, and finally you get a push notification so your hot water is ready so you can make a tea. So is it necessary? Maybe not. Things can get really, really complicated. And maybe some of you know this image if you have read Design of Everyday Things from Don Norman. It's one of my favorite books for getting started in UX. It's a so-called teapot for masochists. And it somehow symbolizes how a lot of our products are basically built today. And it's also true of the space of software design. I mean, we're talking about innovation, which is really a good thing. But sometimes I think we are putting a lot of pressure on that. We really have the pressure to innovate on something. And for example, you can go crazy with innovation and invent some really awesome volume controls. The one question is it really that usable? Maybe not. Here is another real-world scenario where Adobe got rid of a complicated feature. Well, the old, I mean, you know it, the old undo button in Photoshop. So finally, after 30 years, they got to an industry standard, non-complicated, and it's even named the new undo feature. It's really amazing. But at the end, to summarize this, complicated things can be really avoided. So you can say no to them. And there's also a nice quote from Einstein we got, that he said that things should be made as simple as possible, so avoid feature creep as much as you can, but not simpler. And here we are dealing with the remaining complexity. So we're removing everything that's complicated, but we are letting there with a certain amount of complexity which we have to deal with. And this is what we are basically doing when we want to build specially software for the professional environment, which by nature is complex. But there is a way to somehow to handle it. And the first method, I'm borrowing basically from organizations, from corporations. So I mean, corporations are very complex organizations, and they structure themselves using hierarchies. You have the workforce at the bottom, then you have the middle managers, and they are reporting up to the CEO, and depending how big the corporation is, sorry for that. Then more layers you have in between it. It's not the most efficient model, but at least it works. When we look at software design, here is an example from Sketch, and you also use tree views. You can use tree views to display hierarchies, how you can basically group small entities together to give you a high-level overview of that. So usually the good thing is you can quickly tidy up. Let's say you have a lot of objects and you can really merge them together. You have a group and somehow it's tidy. You really keep on seeing the overview. And that's pretty important because I mean you always need to have you always need to find the context of your work. So to summarize it, you can use hierarchies in the form of tree views and in the form of groups to organize your content and maybe you reuse it together. I mean, dealing with complexity is a lot about organization. And here is an example of a library where you have to organize a lot of books, a lot of complex content. And how do you basically do that? I mean, by nature, you first use categories. I mean, if you go to a bookstore, you see these categories, where to buy, which type of category, which book you want. Then, a level lower, you can use color coding. Basically, bookstores are using, or libraries are using color coding, and this is basically by the cover of the book. You can see that certain books, they are blue, they belong together, and then we have other areas of ordering, which is basically, it's ordering by itself. So when you have a row, a cluster of books which belong together, they are ordered alphabetically. And this is a way how you can manage a huge and complex library. When we bring this to software design, we have menus. Menus are basically like kind of libraries. This is an example from Cinema 4D. When I was working at Maxon, we had to redesign the whole menu structure. And what we did first, we put stuff into task-based categories. So what was important for us, okay, the user is thinking he wants to add something. He wants to remove something. So that's how we grouped all these entities into menus. The next thing is, we really didn't use color coding, but for visual design, we used iconography. So when you have a huge list of entries, the quickest way to spot something is by recognizing a shape, is by using an icon. On the other hand, icons are also pretty abstract. And what helps, if you have a description, a label to it. So the combination of icon and label makes it very powerful to find something very quick. So iconography and labeling and categorization helps a lot in this case. And at the end, you also have some entries and the way how you order it. You can use mostly alphabetical ordering. We sometimes did it, but not always. So what's also important when you work for, or when you build, let's say, tools for other people, is the way where you place all your, let's say, sub-tools, all your entities. And here, for example, we have a goldsmith workbench. And the important thing is that everything is really, really nicely placed in the right order. So here on the right side, there are these hammers. Then here at the bottom, we have the scissors. And then we have also in the drawers, we have the small tooltips. It's in the drawers because it's not used so often. And then there is this gas burner at the left side. So the goldsmith basically can navigate blindly through his workbench. This is something we can also take to software design. And here is, for example, Affinity Designer. Their layout is based in a similar way. On the left side, you have the tool palette. On the top, you have the quick actions. And on the right side, you have all these palettes for layers, color swatches, and so on. So everything is placed in a nice arranged layout. So if we structure content, it's important that we order all elements in the proper way. So you could use alphabetical ordering. It's important to group things in a logical manner. We can use visual design, so basically using icons and labels to help people to navigate through a huge list of entries. And at the end, we can use everything and place it in a nice arranged layout. All right. Let's get a bit more psychological. Who of you know what mental models are? Okay, only little, I guess more of you know. Because if you deal with UX design, you deal a lot of mental models. And mental models are basically, this is what somebody believes how a system works. That's basically a mental model. So if you learned something, let's say you were dealing with a text editor for the first time, you had no mental model how this works, so you were learning it. And while you are learning, you are creating this model in your head. And the next time you sit in front of a text editor, you basically use the knowledge what you have in your head, what you learned, you basically think about your mental model in this case. You build basically experiences, you're building basically, you learn on previous experiences. So when we, for example, have this icons of a text editor, I guess most of us will exactly know what happens when I click on each of these icons. So because we know this from experience, this is our trained mental model. And when we, for example, look at Microsoft Word, which was defining all of these mental models, we were encountering the first time all these topics about text formatting. So we were dealing with tab stops, with font formatting, with fonts, stuff like Comic Sans, and maybe stuff like Clippy, like clip arts, word arts, something which is maybe not so common, but we learned it for the first time on Microsoft Word. So this way where we are building our mental models. So for example, when Google Docs came out, and they wanted to build an intuitive text editor, they had to follow these same patterns like Word has done. So basically because they knew people have these mental models, people have these previous experiences, and they have to incorporate them. What they did on innovation was the collaborative feature. So this was something which Word didn't have, and Google brought in all these collaboration possibilities. So that was basically the innovation. Besides that, they had to stick to the mental model. So when you use mental model, you use people's existing knowledge, and this makes an application feel intuitive because there's basically no learning involved. People use existing knowledge in this case. And it's important if you introduce new interaction patterns or new workflows that you stay consistent with that. So people learn it once and they can apply it multiple times. Okay. I mean, people are different, and so are their working environments. This is basically, people are customizing their working environments. And each working environment is pretty different. So you can have a really stylized, artistic work environment, you can have a minimal one, or you can have a controlled, chaotic workspace. And every one of them is fine, everything works nicely, because customizing this working environment gives you kind of an ownership. And also this person who has this maybe controlled, chaotic working environment, he or she is the owner of this chaos. And the worst thing what can happen to this person, somebody from external would tidy up everything. It would get lost, or he or she would get lost. We customize our working environments for feel good, for feeling at home and feeling comfortable. And this makes us also more productive. So software has to incorporate this as well. For example, here is the way how AutoCAD is doing it. So they allow you to customize the interface. And here's a way how Visual Studio Code is doing it. I mean, it's one of the most favorite code editor. And they start by giving you a very minimal version. So the minimal version is the one which basically every developer, all the features are needed by every developer. And then let's say, depending on which programming language you use extensions. So you add functionality on top, so you somehow customize your development environment. So that's why customization is pretty important, because you can use interface options to customize your interface by moving buttons around, or you use modules like Visual Studio Code is doing this with their extensions. All right. Let's maybe go back to this nicely controlled chaos. One thing that we see are these post-its. I don't know if you see it so well, but they are definitely post-its at the screen. So what this person is doing, it's putting basically some knowledge from the head into the world by writing down post-its. I mean, I'm using post-its, people use post-its a lot to stir certain knowledge there. And here is an example how I do this basically at home and why it's so necessary. I have this printer, and since 2 years, I always had trouble of printing two-sided pages. Maybe some of you know that, you print it, and then how do you turn it back in the tray so that your print is not shifted 180 degrees, or maybe you print again on the same side. The thing is, I never could remember how to do this. So I once wrote it down on a post-it so that when you get the paper out, you have to turn it from left to right and then put it this way in the tray. And this is how I basically solved my everyday problem of printing two-sided pages by using a simple post-it. Here we find other ways of post-its, or maybe knowledge in the world, in the industry, everyday industry. And this is by also using these warning symbols. I mean, people don't read manuals, so it's so important to place the most important knowledge directly at the place. And this knowledge in the world is also called just-in-time knowledge, because you get the knowledge directly at the moment where you need it. In software, we have tooltips. These are mostly the common way. You hover over an icon, and then you get the information. You can have it in a minimal way, but it also works in an extended way. For example, this is Ableton Live, and they have this info view in the corner. So when you hover with your mouse over your interface, the info view is showing you exactly, it's describing you the feature where you are with the mouse. And this can get more extended, so you have more information how the feature works. You also have information about the shortcut, and you have also a link to the manual provided. So you can extend this concept very well. So use just-in-time knowledge in the form of tooltips. Provide them links to manuals so that they get directly to this point where needed. This is something which code editors are also doing. So when you are over the function, you can sometimes press a key and it's directing you directly to the documentation. Of course, meaningful defaults are important as well, because people need to understand how certain parameters are working together. And when you work with multiple people together, you work in a collaborative space, it's important that your coworker can also give you some just-in-time knowledge or some knowledge in the world. And this can be done by using comments in their work or by using color coding. So when people collaborate together, of course, they need to hand over certain knowledge. They hand over the work, the project work basically they do, and they need to hand over some knowledge in form of instructions or explanations. Then we have a scenario like this. Maybe you expect it from your coworker to have the right side, that he's really putting everything nicely in color codes or is renaming everything nice. But often you get this thing on the left side. So because this is a common working scenario, your software has to support you to deal with it. So what should you do? You analyze it. You have to deconstruct it, you have to understand what your coworker has done. Or maybe sometimes if you work like this, you have to often analyze your own work, because you sometimes don't understand it. And a good example can be borrowed from how maps are working. I mean, this is an overview of Frankfurt, and let's say you want to find a local drugstore. I mean, looking on an aerial photograph like that can be it's pretty hard to find it. What would help you is some nice overlay information, so that you basically see certain important spots there. And maybe you spotted your local drugstore, but you need to somehow navigate through it. You need to find your way. So maybe a simplified version of your map could really help you. And finally, you want to plan more accurately. You want to estimate the time, how much it takes you to get from A to B. Maybe some traffic information would help you. This so-called reducing or enhancing of information can be also found in online shops. I mean, let's say you want to find your product from a huge range of products the online shop is offering to you. So you use certain filtering mechanisms and ordering mechanisms to find the right product. Once you have found all your desired items, it's also important to manipulate them at one single action. So you need to somehow do multi-selection and somehow batch processing, like you can do in a Finder. So it's important that a user can manipulate multiple objects at the same time. So if you build a tool which is pretty complex in this case, you need to provide certain functions. So provide them functions for analyzing complex content in the way of display options or filtering, and allow them also to manipulate what they can do. So for example, allow multi-selection and multi-editing. And of course, allow batch processing options. The batch processing is an important thing because nobody of us likes to do repetitive tasks. I mean, we like to take shortcuts. Here we have a small misalignment between the designer, the park planner, and the person who's basically using it. I mean, we really like to take shortcuts because we want to get quickly from A to B. When you think this in a software term, the most common sense thing is, of course, using keyboard shortcuts. But there are also nice other ways. For example, if you have to select from a range of 100 functions and you maybe need only 10% of it, it's very fast to type in the names, so using a commander. Another nice way of using shortcuts are so-called UI shortcuts. For example, this is teamwork projects, and here you can assign a task to a person. So in this case, there is a task assigned to me, and when I cannot deal with the deadline, I have a nice button shortcut, a UI shortcut, to postpone the deadline for 7 days. So provide the user with certain shortcuts in your application. Allow them to use keyboard shortcuts, which is basically common sense. Maybe build a commander. And allow them some interface shortcuts that they can really quickly see when they have common actions in your interface, they can really move around them. Okay, the last topic I would like to talk about is an emotional one. I mean, it's so important that you are engaged and motivated when conquering a complex application. And what we are doing, we as people, we really like to build something because it gives us like some sense of achievement. It gives some dopamine, so your brain is producing dopamine. And this is also why people really love their graphics software, because it enables them to do something. So here's the screenshot back from Affinity Designer. People really like graphics software because it enables them to do something. It doesn't have to be always true for graphic applications. It can be also true for dealing with your taxes. So doing taxes can be such a boring thing. I mean, nobody likes to fill out forms. But luckily, Wolters Kluwer brought this application Steuersparerklärung, and they added this green rectangle at the corner. So once you enter all your stuff to fill out your taxes, you see that the money, the estimates basically the money you will get back from your tax office, the amount gets bigger and bigger. And this is really motivating. It's like playing a game with coins, so it's really cool. It's cooler unless this thing doesn't get red, so it's really cool in this case. So the last thing, if you want to build a complex application, provide some engagement for your user. So give them some sense of achievement if they build something that they can see their results pretty quickly, and allow some gamification, which also drives this engagement and motivation. To summarize it, complicated things should be avoided, and complexity can be managed. You can manage complexity by using hierarchies in form of groups and tree views. You can structure your content by using ordering, by also using color coding. You can use mental models by knowing exactly the experience of your users to make an application intuitive. You can allow customization options, so your users are basically customizing your application so they feel like at home. Use just-in-time knowledge, so they can basically learn while doing it. Build the right tools for analyzing and manipulating content. Provide them with shortcuts. And finally, give them some engagement so that they are somehow motivated to learn your application. Thank you for listening.